Hello guys, this is Faden. So in this short video, I'd like to discuss with you a very critical use case many of my clients been asking me about recently, which is how to manage Kubernetes workloads when I have multiple Kubernetes cluster running on different clouds. Do we need to have a DevOps pipeline for every cluster? Is there a way for us to watch the states of these clusters or of these worker nodes and then migrate the applications from one cluster to another cluster on different clouds? Is there a way for us to see all the resources of our Kubernetes or OpenShift clusters from one single dashboard, or do we have to go into every cloud provider portal to see that? Now, the answer to this question is there are honestly so many workarounds in so many ways of doing this. However, the most efficient way of doing it is to actually utilize and adopt a multi-cluster management solution capability and integrate them with your Kubernetes cluster. And this is what I wanted to discuss with you today, which is the IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. Now, the multi-cloud management consists of different modules that serves different use cases within the area of multi-cloud. However, today's focus is going to be on the application lifecycle or the application management using the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. In using the Cloud Pak for MCM, you will have the ability to actually migrate that workload from one cluster to another cluster without the need of designing or running a DevOps pipeline or doing things manually. And as well as it gives you the ability to have a single control plane where you will be able to see all your Kubernetes resources that are running on Azure Cloud, on AWS, on Google, and so on. And not to mention, there's also the security and compliance management capability that ensures your Kubernetes clusters or maybe your Kubernetes infrastructure is actually up to the compliance level. So let me show you a quick demo on how the multi-cloud management for application lifecycle works. So if I go to the browser, you can see that this is basically the main dashboard for the IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. You can see here within the overview page, I can see the different type of workloads that I have, as well as the clusters that are running on different clouds. So for example, I have three virtual machine running on VMware vCenter in my private data center, and as well as I have two OpenShift clusters running on AWS and one Kubernetes cluster running on Azure Cloud. And you can see that it says basically one Kubernetes cluster. And if also you can go to the compute resources, you will see that the total number of Kubernetes clusters are actually 3. And the virtual machine pools running based on VMware vCenter is actually 1. And you can see also the total number of applications that are being managed by the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. Now again, guys, the DevOps CI/CD pipeline actually integrates with the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. And the last stage of the deployment is going to be taken care of by the Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management and not the DevOps tool, for example, Jenkins, Urban Code, or Spinnaker, and so on. And the reason why is that because the multi-cloud management has the capability to actually talk to the other Kubernetes clusters running on different clouds and then will be taking care of the deployment or migrating these resources from one cloud to another. So you can see here when I scroll down the different applications that I have on the IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management, as well as the number of resources or the number of applications deployed on which cluster. Today's focus is actually on the managed application lifecycle. But before I do that, let me actually go to the cluster section just to show you how many Kubernetes cluster or OpenShift cluster integrated with the IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. So you can see here that I have one cluster called Managed 1, and I have another cluster called Managed 2, and also I have my own cluster which is called Private mFadden on Azure Cluster. And you can of course see the information of the cluster, the ID of the cluster, as well as if you have any compliance violation or policy violation. Automatically the multi-cloud management security and profile compliance is going to be triggering any alerts in case, for example, my cluster is not up to the compliance level. And I only have one worker node for this small cluster running on Azure Cloud. And you can also see the information, the core, the memory, And then if I go to the back again to the clusters, let's say for example, you want to add an existing cluster running on AWS or maybe on Microsoft. Do I really need to somehow do a lot of tweaking on my existing cluster? No, the answer is no. Because if you want to integrate or if you want to import actually the your cluster to the Cloud Pak from Multi-Cloud Management, the way you will do that is just by clicking Add Cluster and then clicking on Import. Once you go to the import section, basically you will just write your name of the cluster. Let's say for example, some cluster running on, let's say, AWS. I'm going to choose any namespace where exactly I want to have this on my management hub. I'm going to click on generate the command line, and then what you would need to do next is just to actually copy this command line, execute it in your Kubernetes or OpenShift cluster on any cloud provider, and then automatically the pods needed to communicate with the multi-cloud management will be created in your cluster. So as I mentioned earlier, we have multiple of Kubernetes clusters over here. Some of these clusters are actually deployed on AWS, Microsoft, IBM, or maybe even internal. And then the deployment is going to be done based on the labels. So you can see basically here that we have multiple of labels, and then when we deploy this application or these pods is going to be basically based on the labels for our cluster. So what I'm going to do now, I'm just going to go to the hybrid application section, and then you can see the list of applications that we have managed by the multi-cloud management component or the pods themselves. And you can see here, for example, that the check balance API AWS is actually being deployed on 2 Kubernetes clusters on different clouds. And by the way, there is no DevOps pipeline. The DevOps pipeline is only going to be, as I said before, until the continuous integration build management phase, and then it's going to be handing over to IBM Cloud Pak for Multi-Cloud Management. And you can see also here we have the mod resort application, which is basically running on 1 cluster. So let me just click on that. And the IBM Cloud Pak for MCM does a really great job in analyzing as well as visualizing the application components or the microservices components that are running on Kubernetes. So you can see that we have a service component here. We have a pod running over here as well. We also have the route that allows us to access the cluster or the pod itself. And also we have a deployment component, and these are basically the deployable objects that we created so that the IBM Cloud Pak for MCM can understand and translate these into actual services or objects running on Kubernetes. And you can see that the mod resort application is actually running on the Hondo managed 1 cluster. Okay, you can also see the number of pods, the cluster IP, as well as the status, the CPU, memory. Everything is actually being done from within this dashboard. And this really adds a lot of comfort and a lot of, I would say, productivity to the SRE teams who are actually going to be managing these Kubernetes clusters across clouds. Now, let's say, for example, I want to deploy this application, or I want to migrate this application from this Hondo managed 1 cluster to the production environments. And I believe the Hondo managed 1 cluster is actually running on a dev environment. So I'm going to click on this component, which is basically called the placement rule component, and the placement rule component or object to tell Cloud Pak for MCM where, which cluster or where you would like to deploy this application. So if I scroll down a little bit here, you can see that the reason why the mod resort application was deployed to the Hondo managed 1 cluster is because of this label, deployed to the environment dev label. Okay, so if I actually change this to production, and if I change the cluster replicas to 2, because I have 2 Kubernetes cluster running as production for myself, I'm going to apply the YAML from within the browser. I don't need to actually go to the command line and do that, but I can of course do that as well. Automatically, the watcher component within the Cloud Pak for MCM will say, oh, so you're now telling me to actually deploy the mod resort application or migrate the application to the production clusters. And the Cloud Pak for MCM is going to be handling this job for us. and ensure that the state of the application is actually as desired. So if I refresh the page, the new visualization of our application, right now the application is going to be deployed on Hondo Managed 2 cluster, as well as the private and Faden Azure cluster as well, which is basically running on the Azure cloud. And you can see we have two pods, and these are the two pods over here. We have pod number 1 and pod number 2. You can notice the small tiny question mark icon, which basically means that the status of the pod is unknown. And this is most likely because the Cloud Pak for MCM is deploying the pod into the Hondo Managed cluster, as well as the services deployment and also the routes. Because as soon as the deployment is successful and is completed, you will see the tick on the green tick on these components within the topology itself. So let me just try to refresh the page one more time. So you can see right now the pod on the private and Faden cluster on a running status, and I can even go and visualize the container logs from within the browser, from within the dashboard itself. And soon also we will see the pod for the Hondo Managed to be updated.